Welcome everyone to another episode of LunarCRUSH Live. We've got a super fun show. We're already having fun backstage with Charles right now. But we've got Charles, founder of IOHK, Input Output Hong Kong, coming on here in a second. Also lead on Cardano. And John's going to talk a little bit about Cardano here for a second, community, social, and then we'll bring Charles on. And we're really excited to have him. So let's do it.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. Wow. I'm super excited to talk about Cardano. We've posted so many social insights for Cardano over the last year because we keep seeing activity spike. Let's start with just what are we seeing on the market side? So currently price is 138 over the last year. Nothing to be ashamed of here. 4,087.95% price change over the last year. That is unbelievable. So congrats to everyone, to all the Cardano holders out there. Giving it a market cap of 44.39 billion, about 5.35 billion of volume over the last 24 hours. And there's currently 32.03 billion out of 45 billion in circulation. So with that, wow, impressive. Putting it at rank 6, I should say. So let's look at some social activity. So over the last year, this data is looking at the last 12 months as of today. We see that social volume has increased 332%. We're talking about, a year ago, it was 1,810 social mentions on that day. Today, 16,537, we've seen it move as high as 55,982 per day. And what that's doing is that's measuring every time the word Cardano was mentioned, the ticker ADA, if it's hashtag Cardano, any combination of anything Cardano related is picked up across multiple social channels. And so we picked that up. Very impressive, 2.7 million posts over the last year. When we go a little deeper than that and look at the depth of what's going on in those posts. So it's one thing to say that there's a mention. It's another thing to say, well, when there was a Cardano mention, how deep did those conversations go? And we look at that through social engagement. And we're looking at things like comments and retweets and upvotes on Reddit and things like that. We see the high there was 76 million social engagements. So that's incredibly high. That's a really big number. We're also looking at the size of the community itself. This is maybe my favorite metric here because it's also one thing to say that there's people that are continually posting about a coin all day. We see it all the time on Twitter. But it's another thing to say, was that a lot of unique individuals? So social contributors measures unique users on a daily basis. And so when we look at that, again, a year ago, 666. Let's fast forward to today, 11,447. The high there was 30,639 people. Very, very impressive. Another thing to look at here is the dominance. So, we're all used to looking at market cap dominance, but if there was a pie chart of all of the social activity per coin, how much does Cardano take out of that pie? And we see that, right now, today, it is at 1.82% of all social posts are related to Cardano. That's gone as high as 9.41%.
Wow.
And remember, this is daily averages. We've seen it actually move as high as 25 to 30% on an hourly basis on some days. So very, very strong. In fact, it's one of the strongest moves in all of crypto. It's pretty amazing. I won't get too much into it, but we measure the individual strength of the coin. So Galaxy Score looks just at Cardano and nothing else. And it says, is Cardano looking really strong from a combined social and market perspective together right now? And so we see, yes, it is. It's 68 out of 100. That's very bullish. That's actually really good. And when we see it from an alt rank perspective, this is Cardano versus the entire market. And it's also looking at combined social and market activity. And we see that it's currently ranking 15 out of 2,077 coins that qualify to be tracked. So out of the top 2,077 coins, Cardano right now has the 15th strongest social and market activity out there. To go a little further, in fact, I'm just going to click on this and look at the influencers. So we measure influencer activity. So what we objectively look at a few different things. So we look at all of the different social accounts out there. This is currently just for Twitter. We're going to be expanding that to other sources in the future, but Twitter looks at really a few different metrics. It looks at the amount of engagement that the post that an account is doing. It looks at the number of posts that account is doing, and it looks at the really relative following of that account. And it looks at it relative to a coin. and relative to timeframes. So when we look over the last year, we've got input output as the number one influencer, where 94.4% of their posts were about Cardano. We see that here we are with this might look familiar. IOHK Charles is the second biggest influencer over the last year. And then we get into the Cardano account, JRNY Crypto. Shout out to Crypto Recruiter, David Gochstein with a lot of posts about Cardano, Beastly Orion, Alexandra Huck, the Crypto Lark, and Benjamin Cowan. So I'm sure some of these names look familiar. So with that, let's bring in our guest, Joe.
Cool. Charles, thank you for suffering through our data.
Oh, no, I love it.
Pretty amazing stuff with the community and the engagement, and just congrats on all the success, man.
Well, first I have to ask, are you the guys aggregating all that together? Is that your dashboard?
That is us.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's incredible. So you guys just use like the world's best web scrapers, or how do you pull all this together?
We just have one of the world's best developers that, sits at home and only, aggregates data for the last 5 years of his life. So no, we use APIs. We do a little bit of scraping. We do a little bit of everything. But it was a lot of manual work up front to get like the organization of the data was probably the hardest part.
Wow, that's super impressive. We should definitely talk offline about this stuff, because we've been trying to put our own social suites together just for internal KPIs and metrics for goal setting, and it's so cool to see a dashboard like that. I love what you guys are doing.
Cool, man. Well, I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you. And yeah, man. So we always like to start this. Where in the world are you today? What's it like there?
Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. I'm actually in Longmont, Colorado at the IO Global home office, and it's snowing outside this morning, but not too bad, like 30 degrees. Got my poncho on. It's poncho weather.
It's very cool.
Amazing.
Very cool. And so I got a fun question for you to start before we start getting all the serious stuff. But and I haven't asked this one before, but I wanted to ask you. So say Satoshi wakes up from a coma today. Right? He, she have been in a coma. They don't know anything about Bitcoin. They don't know anything. First off, what's the reaction to Bitcoin? And then what do they start working on?
Oh, if Nakamoto somehow magically returned, well,
magically was in a coma this last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, the problem with deities is after you deify them, even if the original person who occupied that throne comes back, nobody believes it. So the first thing that would happen is that person would say, I'm Satoshi, and nobody would say that's a real person. So it create a little bit of a schism in a holy war. You ever play Warhammer 40K? It's like if the Emperor of Man returns in the Warhammer universe, it's like nobody would even believe he's really the Emperor, even if he left the Golden Throne, because there's like a cult that's around Satoshi now, and people have built Satoshi up to be a god, whereas it's just a really bright, innovative programmer / academic who was able to bring something super cool for its time that was quite revolutionary, and now is quite out of date. If I had to guess who Satoshi was, I'd say the most likely candidate is probably Adam Back. And if that's the case, then Satoshi's already awoken and is leading the leading Bitcoin, upgrade company, Blockstream. But who knows? And it would be fun. Crypto is always weird. It's always got something coming. There's always something there. Like I remember Craig Wright when he first announced himself, and I was one of the first people to say this guy's full of shit, and then I ran into him in Rwanda. I literally, I walked off the stage when I heard that he was speaking. So as soon as he came up, I walked off. There's a very famous video of that. And back in that day, there were a lot of people like Gavin Andresen, and I think even Roger Ver was drinking the Kool-Aid for a little bit that Craig was Satoshi or related to Satoshi or something. And that fizzled its way out. So I think we're past all of that. And
right.
As for, oh my God, we have to worry. What if he sells all of his coins? I'm sorry. If a founder can crash your product, then you're not decentralized. If Satoshi sold his coins, the market would absorb it in a month and take a bit of a dip and then go right back to normal. In fact, probably better for Bitcoin because it would create some more liquidity and stability in the asset.
No, that's good. And so you kind of touched on it a little bit. So what do you think? I mean, personally, I think, Satoshi, whoever that was, innovator, someone that is adapting to where the world is today. I mean, what are some of the, areas that you think like an innovator like that would be working in right now where the space is today? What would they be building?
Well, there was a lot of synthesis with Satoshi that was really clever. For example, the creation of the UTXO accounting model, Bitcoin script, proof of work, obviously, these types of things. And, it wasn't the case that Satoshi invented all these things. It was more that they existed throughout academia or the cypherpunk movement or in the open source software world for decades. And what that person was able to do was take them, polish them, iterate them, and put them together into a singular product. For example, Adam Back created proof of work when he was working for Microsoft, and originally it was called Hashcash as a spam prevention mechanism. And Bitcoin script was based upon a programming language called Forth, which came out, I think, either in the 1970s or 1980s, and it was a stack-based assembly, and it kind of lived in the PostScript world. So if the genius was just to take these types of things and put them together in just the right way. So if one was to go and work on something like Bitcoin, it's a natural evolution of that. Now, we took that mantle in certain respects. Our company's research group first formalized everything. So when we entered the space and started doing our R&D, it wasn't even clear what a blockchain was as a mathematical object or as an academic object, something you'd study and prove properties about. So Agalos, our chief scientist, wrote this lovely paper called the GKL15 model, the Bitcoin Backbone Protocol, and it created a set of security properties for what is a blockchain. Once you have those, then you can start meaningfully talking about, is proof of stake secure? Is proof of work secure? How do you model against a quantum adversary? So a person with a quantum computer or something like that. So that was a whole research line, and we kept iterating that model and evolving it. We also formalized the UTXO model that Satoshi had created. And there were some lovely Italian academics who did that as well with something called BitML. And then we created an extension to that model called Extended UTXO. Then we said, okay, well, how do we build better Bitcoin script? And we said, well, why don't we just take a functional language that makes a lot of sense and build a DSL on top of it and then have an off-chain and on-chain component. And that's what we did with Plutus and so forth. Same for the network stack, same for the ledger rules, same for how to formalize things. So in many ways, we kind of took that mantle and just kept it going, but then introduced the academic world and fixed the broken windows as we came around them. And then we also tried to build up a corpus of science to show what you can and cannot do. That said, there's a lot of really exciting things on the Bitcoin side that ecosystem's working on, from Lightning to Covenants to getting Schnorsigs and to ideas about like simplicity, for example, which was Russell O'Connor's language that he created to add smart contracts to Bitcoin. And obviously there's things like NEPA-POWs, which the Silicon Valley interpretation is something called Fly Client. So I think if Satoshi came back, that's probably the stuff that he or she would do, is in that realm. It's like, how do we get better Lightning support? How do we get side chains? And how do we get a better scripting language? It's an open question of whether there'd be an admission that proof of work isn't the end all be all, and that there are things you can do to make proof of work better. Like, for example, Pramod Viswanath's paper, Prism, is just a beautiful thing. It makes Bitcoin 10,000 times faster without a lot of downsides. So why not go do that if you're a proof of stake adherent?
Can you explain that a little bit further in detail?
Yeah, so basically it's a paper where you can mine multiple blocks at the same time. And this line of research with DAGs and multi-block mining and multi-validators has been going on for half a decade or more, actually for almost 10 years now. The first paper was called Spectre, and we used that in Ethereum, and it didn't really work too. Actually, it was Ghost, and then later Spectre, and then later Phantom. So that was Avi Zohar and Yonatan Somopinski, and there are these guys out of Israel that did that. And then what Pramod did is he kind of put all these different papers together, like better data structures, better, a lot of info theory. Like he wrote this paper called Polyshard, and he basically figured out how do you mine stuff in parallel and then kind of serialize everything and put it back together. And so instead of just one person doing something, you can have a large group of people doing something. And so you can process transactions as batches. And somehow when you put it all back together, the ordering always is deterministic, and that you can show that double spending can't happen. So it's a beautiful paper, and he wrote a prototype, and what he did is he replayed the entire Bitcoin blockchain with it. So he took the Bitcoin code base, tore out proof of work, put in Prism, and then he started from the Genesis block in January 3rd of 2009, just kind of ran it through. And, it takes more than 12 years to get through Bitcoin. With Prism, you can get through the thing in a few weeks.
Wow.
It's about 10,000 times faster. So it's a beautiful protocol, but there's many of those types of protocols floating around, whether it be Bitcoin NG or dozens of other optimizations to proof of work. And they're just legitimately great. And there are also some theoretical attacks to discuss, like greedy mining, for example, and these things. And they exist, and they're real attack vectors and problems. And then also there needs to be a layer 2 kind of coordination layer for mining pools inside the system. So, for example, the Corello and Falcon relay networks were the two things when I was still thinking about that back in the day in the Bitcoin, but there's probably all kinds of relay networks now. But the basic idea is that miners actually coordinate with each other before they do stuff with the Bitcoin protocol. And they do this for a variety of reasons. So there's a lot of that stuff that needs to be figured out. And there's tons of great science. There's thousands of papers now. And there's just a lot of obvious things to do, like better authenticated data structures, perhaps introducing erasure codes in clever places. I've seen a lot of great work with fountain codes in the network stack. For example, that was done by the Harmony guys because they come from the Amazon world. And they know a lot about that. And these are examples of just like you get a lot of extra stuff and you pay nothing for it. It doesn't reduce the security of the protocol or change the underlying trust model of Nakamoto consensus or so forth. But it's such a big ecosystem now and everything's such a holy war. I remember the big block debate and it was obvious to me how to solve that. You just say, guys, why don't you put a growth factor in where the block, like, Bitcoin's monetary policy changes where your inflation decreases by factor of 2 every 4 years. Why don't you just put something like that into, organically grow the block size, every so often, maybe either continuous or like a step function or something like that. Is, oh no, we can't do that. We can't even entertain this conversation. So let me get this straight. Hard drives don't increase in capacity every 5 years or 10 years. Network capacity doesn't increase every 5 years or 10 years. I used to have 56K modem. Now I'm on a fiber optic internet connection here.
Does your sound machine over there have the 56K modem sound? Because if not, it should.
Oh, I got to get that on the sound machine. Roadcaster's great.
You said something in there, and some of the stuff that I've seen you put together and watching some of your stuff is you seem very focused on peer-reviewed information and data and publishing, and like saying it out loud, it makes obviously there's a lot of sense behind why you would do that. But why do you think other folks maybe aren't as focused as getting their information out there and getting the rest of the market and industry on board and kind of auditing their work?
Well, because they could get away with it when the protocols were simple. When you talk about something like build a wallet or go ahead and build a cell phone app or go ahead and build a peer-to-peer protocol, there's all this stuff off the shelf that just works, like secure Kademlia and other things like that. Okay, so you have that. And if all your goal is to replicate Bitcoin, you can do that as a synthesis job. You just put things together. When you start talking about making these systems scale to millions to billions of users or very sophisticated cryptography, suddenly, when you go to the back room to go get your crypto or you go to the back room to go get your protocols, none of them exist. And so you have to invent new ones. And suddenly you go from engineer to protocol designer. That's a very different job. And there's the set of people who do that really well is much smaller. So you can't move fast and break things because what ends up happening is every time you try to build a protocol, it's like sand in your hand. It just kind of slips through. There's something that goes wrong with it. And you only discover it after the fact. You have to throw everything away and get back to the drawing board, do it all over again. Vitalik ran into this with Ethereum too. They kept prognosticating, Casper's coming out 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. And they legitimately believed it. And the protocols worked until they didn't work. Why? Because they weren't following a rigorous process. Generally, what you do is you first start with foundational work. So impossibility theorems like FLP impossibility or whatever, you start doing all that stuff at the base layer and you know what's physically possible and what's not possible. And you have proofs of why it's impossible and so forth. Okay. Then once you have that, you start building systems in a series of layers. So what you do is you first say, let's assume something unrealistic, a fully synchronous system and everybody shows up at the same time and a centralized committee and whatever. And let's just show that it works under that condition. Okay. Because what that does for you is if you can't get it to work in the best of conditions, there's no way in hell you're getting it to work in real life conditions.
Yeah.
Once you show it works in the best of conditions, you can set up a strategy of systematically attacking each part that you need to improve. So let's go from a synchronous to a semi-synchronous model. Let's have adaptive security. So nobody knows who's actually won until after the fact. Let's go ahead and make sure that the system has finality and You go through all these different design requirements. And each one of those is a paper. And every one of those papers is a layer that sits on top of the prior layer. And because you're following one chain of proofs, one chain of custody there, you know it's going to work. And you don't have to regress if you can't solve that particular problem. So it's a little longer in the beginning. But the advantage is that when you're going through the peer review process, independent people who aren't you, who have no financial incentives, who are a member of the body academique, so they're academics, are reading your papers and criticizing them and saying, hey, we have concerns here. The other thing is, once they understand your papers, you have common language between your scientists and protocol designers and the rest of the academic community. And then what happens is, if you're writing good papers, they start citing your paper and they start doing derivative work. So what ends up happening as you're building layer after layer, you start accelerating because the set of people working on your problems is increased. And also the level of certainty that you have that your solutions are correct increases as well. So it makes just common sense if you have several years to follow an agenda like that. And you look at Ethereum, it was like, they had several years. It made perfect sense to just go buy a lab. Like, Vitalik just went on vacation back in 2015. It went to Cornell, to Elaine Shee's lab and Ari Jules and the rest of the guys there for the IC3, and just said, I like Snow White. Here's $10 million. Go write me Casper. They probably would have had it done in 2018 or 2019. And it would have been far better than the design that they had today, because that lab has great people. They could have done that, and have been a little bit of Avalanche and a little bit of Ouroboros and a little bit of Snow White, and all just come together beautifully. And all their design requirements would have been there, and they'd have the security proofs, and they would have gone through peer review, and they would then implement that in 6 months, and huzzah. We literally, in the time that they were working on Casper, they've had a 2-year advantage on us. They started working in like 2014, 2015. We started working 2016. We, from 2016, built a 300-person company, the largest research group in the world, wrote 102 academic papers, more than half peer-reviewed at major venues, wrote 1 million lines of code, launched a cryptocurrency in 2017, upgraded that cryptocurrency to proof of stake. And yet they're still trying to figure out how to grow from proof of work to proof of stake. Oh, no, and by the way, we wrote 2 programming languages, a completely new accounting model, and a new way of developing smart contracts, and a new network model as well. And we did that starting from scratch, borrowing no code from anybody else, because nobody was crazy enough to write it in Haskell, one of the hardest programming languages to use. Okay, so that shows you how that approach that they followed of just kind of moving fast and breaking things, in my view, doesn't work. And the market's catching up to that. If you look at the Harmony team, for example, they're based on academic work like Rapid Chain and other things. If you look at Algorand, that's like MIT's cryptocurrency. Silvio Macaulay is one of the greatest academics alive. He's got the Turing Prize. Avalanche, it came out of Cornell, and there's a really good team there. And actually even Ethereum is conceding. They helped set up the lab at Stanford with Dan Bonet, and they also invested in the Starkware guys over in Israel. And Eli Ben Sasson is a great academic there. So there's a concession that you have to actually carefully write papers. You have to really think about these things. You need security proofs. You need to go through the peer review process and so forth. And yeah, it's frustrating, but it's much faster in computer science land than it is in mathematics or physics or any of these other fields. In math or physics, it can take years to get something published. In comp sci, every 3 months, there's a conference. So, and that's how we do peer review in computer science. It's not done typically through journals because it's just so fast paced and moving. So when you submit to a conference, it's frustrating because only 10 to 20% of the papers are accepted more often than not. You get yelled at, but on the other hand, you can get, 2 or 3 major results a year, as opposed to 1 major result every 2 years or something like that. And you also can meet your colleagues and talk to your colleagues about these types of things. And often they tend to collaborate with you after you get through something. So it just makes a lot more sense.
It's just the bar for quality work. It's just much higher.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, these protocols are too complex, because you're saying we're going from replicated distributed systems, and you go from thousands of users where if you fuck it up, somebody can come and reset it, to millions to billions of users where there's just no possibility for that. And the value at risk is much higher. You're going from when Bitcoin was launched, like worthless, to 2013, when I came on board, it was $1 billion ecosystem, to today, it's $1 trillion ecosystem. So there's just too much money there. And so you really do need to make sure that when you upgrade something, you don't screw it up, because if you do, you could end up, billions of dollars of loss. Or the greatest bug in the history of our industry was the Zcash bug with Lipsnark. Why? Because it wasn't just you could counterfeit coins. You could counterfeit coins, and also nobody would know that that's happened. So even today, there's still this open question of, did somebody take advantage of that bug? And because they can't check the supply on the
Very
private
similar.
side, you have no idea if there's 1 trillion Zcash tokens floating around. Now, probably didn't get exploited because the team was the one that discovered it, but that specter is now there permanently attacking the monetary integrity of the system until they figure out a way out of that. And why is that? It's because there was a problem with the protocol design. There was a problem in the implementation. It was a very subtle bug as a direct result of, just assumptions not being true that they thought and things not being checked. Now imagine that exacerbated at a scale of millions to billions of people and Fortune 500 companies and airplanes in the sky and your medical records and so forth. You just can't fuck it up. So I'm sorry, you can't do like, let's write in JavaScript where I just got out of my programming boot camp. I'm ready to go. I think I understand how it works. I read a tutorial. I was like, no, guys, this is serious engineering. It's high assurance engineering and it's high stakes. And if you screw it up, it's going to hurt people.
It's interesting because we follow social activity all day, every day. And you feel the impatience of the crypto community. They want something now. They wanted Cardano smart contracts a year ago. Like impatience. And it's just an interesting perspective because it's like there's startup culture. I think people got used to startup culture. Maybe this goes back to the .com boom all the way back then, but they tried to translate that right into crypto and move as fast as that. And you're saying it needs to be slower and methodical to scale properly. Right. Just a really great, refreshing perspective to hear.
Well, because there's a difference in engineering. I mean, we move with formal methods and peer review, but we're actually like the crazy people because we move quickly with it. Formal methods, for example, the SEL4 microkernel project took like 10 years for them to do that. The same for CertiK, not CertiK, but CompCert, the certified C compiler that was written in Coq. That was a 10-year project. And so we're doing stuff in months to years. And everybody in the formal methods world is like, whoa, that's so fast. And then you go to crypto land, they're like, God, these guys are so slow. And, oh, fuck you, man. The other thing that really bothers me is that people, because they don't actually understand the nuances and differences in protocol design, they think everything is easy. When you get these YouTube podcasters run around and they say things like, oh, everybody's got proof of stake. No, not the type of proof of stake we've done. And trust me, it's a lot harder of a problem. So the fact that we were first to market with a provably secure proof of stake was a major milestone and achievement, and shows we have 2,000 stake pool operators. It keeps growing. The protocol's behaving as intended. The same for smart contracts. They say, why doesn't Cardano have smart contracts yet? It's like, guys, if I wanted just to copy paste Ethereum, I'm one of the few guys in the world who can do that like super easily because we're one of the few companies that actually wrote a full Ethereum virtual machine. We wrote it in Scala for Mantis. We did that for ETC back in 2016. So it would be very easy to have the Ethereum smart contract model. It's not hard. But then we look at the consequences of the Ethereum smart contract model. Look at the gas fees. Look at the constant retuning that has to be done. Look at the scalability problems. That Prism paper I mentioned, you can replay Bitcoin 10,000 times faster. When you take that same model and you apply it to Ethereum, it's only about 100 times faster. Why? Because the accounting model that they use for Ethereum is fundamentally difficult to scale. You have this global state and it's very difficult to shard. It's one of the reasons why they're having so much trouble with Eth2. It's not conceptually the easiest thing in the world to think about. UTXO, super easy to scale. Everything's local and it's very easy to shard. It was a brilliant design, UTXO. Just getting state into that is a tricky thing, but once you've done that, it's easy to shard. Okay, so we can scale and shard much more easily with this model. Now, the problem is you got to do the work. No one did it. So we had to write the papers. We had to build them out. It took 4 years with the Plutus project to build an accounting model, write the papers, think about it carefully. And we didn't just profess to know how to do this. We hired people who had written programming languages before. We hired Philip Wadler, professor at University of Edinburgh. He created the Haskell programming language, 25,000 citations. He's a brilliant guy. And we said, Phil, go build another language. He's like, you got it, boss. It's going to be a few years. I said, okay, we'll figure it out. And then we brought in Melo Chakravarty and all these other guys who are like hardcore programming guys. And they worked and they wrote all the specs in Agda. We were able to have a verified build of it. And we did it like a proper programming language design. We did it the right way, but then we had to think carefully about the resource model and how to actually write stuff. And then we had to build pedagogical applications. So we wrote a DEX and we wrote these other things to see how that would work in that particular model because it's new. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. It's a very involved process. And they say, oh, you'll never get any developers. So, I got the Plutus Pioneers program. We just launched it. 1,500 developers signed up for it to learn. They're all in a 10-week class learning how to write Plutus smart contracts. We got 5 development companies that are right now just going and writing tons of code in anticipation for the Plutus testnet that's coming in Q2. So that cohort of people is just the beginning. And they're going to be met by the fact that there's a $500 million sitting in Catalyst to fund projects on our system and a gargantuan commercial pipeline of people who want to leave Ethereum. Only 31% of new dApps last year were written on Ethereum. The other 69% were written on other chains. And that trend's only going to continue. Why in God's name would you want to create an application where it costs more in gas fees than any of your other margins? You have a $20 transaction, it pays $60 to send the transaction. And there's always some magic that's going to save you. Oh, optimistic rollups or plasma or F2. It's coming. It's next month. And then everything's great and all the fees will go away. And you can only say that for so long before people say, well, when you figure that out, we'll come back and be multi-chain. But in the meantime, let's go somewhere else, somewhere far more reasonable and so forth. So it's a much more nuanced thing. And you're right about the social metrics. The get rich quick, the massive appreciation of wealth has been just catastrophic for expectation management. And no reasonable, realistic business, commercial, scientific, or cultural endeavor is it the case that you have a doubling every 3 months.
Right.
Much less a week. And if you have that mindset and that expectation, it's a Ponzi scheme. It cannot work. It won't work. And so you're probably going to lose your money. 95% of these wind moon people are going to be broke in 24 months.
No,
and then they're going to short-term capital gains on top of it. I was going to add, go Jeff.
Yeah. And we kind of always, talk about these projects as, these are startups, and, a lot of people, 99% of startups fail. And now startups are they're being built in a slightly different way. But like part of our mission was always to kind of create transparency in the space and try and, when we first started learning about different projects, to try and delineate the difference. We hated the word altcoin, right? Because everyone said, oh, there's Bitcoin and then there's altcoins. And we were like, well, there's a very specific difference between something like a Cardano and, I'm not going to name any names, but a lot of other things that might be out there, right? And you've, Pat gave a bunch of great projects and protocols, pats on the back. And it's like, there's a big difference between those people and everything else that's out there. And to try and help the market understand that there are very smart people working in, very intelligent directions to try and kind of further this industry forth. And it's not necessarily, like you said, copying and pasting something. This is going to take a little bit of time, but you're right. Like, a lot of the projects and people that we talk to, they're not, how can it, it's almost unusable at this point, even for something like NFTs, right? For for democratizing opportunity across the world, like someplace, potentially like Africa, where we just started a new branch of our business. You're not going to get someone, hey, I want an NFT. Now it's $250 in just a transaction fee, right? So it's like that is changing.
I know. And that's the craziness of the model. And, the Bitcoin core developers had actually, like Greg Maxwell and others, pointed this out about the Ethereum virtual machine way back before it launched. They said, look, if you're successful, this is what's going to happen. And the Ethereum guys said, well, don't worry about that. We're fine. We'll have a solution in 2 years.
Yeah.
It'll be all fixed by 2017, by 2018. The minute that you go from replicated to distributed, it just gets so hard. Then there's uncomfortable philosophical questions that have yet to be answered in our industry. For example, is it okay to breach mutability? Can you throw stuff away? Can you prune things away? So let's say you're a multi-coin system and you now have 500 million coins of different tokens issued on your system, and 99% of them are dead coins. Can you go garbage collect and throw some of those away at some point? Can you retire? If you have side chains, you have hundreds of side chains wired onto your system and they're maintained by your consensus algorithm. There's a lot of overhead there. That's like attaching chains to your back. Okay, can you throw some of those side chains away if they're dead chains? Well, the cult of Satoshi says, no, it's forever immutable. Well, what happens when the blockchain's a petabyte or an exabyte? So how do you have it where everybody has their own blockchain? Only 2 people have it, Google and the NSA. Pick which one you want to get your data source from, right? So how do we get to
Not a fun guessing game there.
yeah, well, they're probably the same at this point. How do you get to a point where you can throw stuff away? And there's hundreds of these philosophical questions that tend to exist. And the biggest problem is you need a governance system. Okay, it's not about, well, can we proactively predict all these philosophical questions and write the Bible of crypto, and somehow this will guide us 2,000 years later, and the Satoshi Carpenter shall forgive us for our sins. No, you can't do that. These are evolving protocols. The questions are unpredictable. The facts and circumstances are unpredictable. New tech comes up, new challengers come up. So you don't judge a cryptocurrency just by what it does today. You evolve it by its capacity for change and its ability to address complex questions and converge to a consensus and evolve in that direction. For example, F1 has to change to F2. So they're going from proof of work to proof of stake. They're firing an entire constituency in their ecosystem. It's going to be a very difficult transition. Well, what if you had a voting system to facilitate that, and an automated update system that once the vote is converged and there's enough time passed, that it auto forks in that particular direction? Okay. This is one of the bedrocks of Cardano. And the only other chain out there that's even thinking about this and giving us a run for our money, and that is Tezos. But it's just such an obvious idea. You need an update system. You need a voting system, because I can't predict what quantum computers are going to be able to do in 2030. But I do know that if they exist and they're real, they could be an existential threat to cryptocurrencies. So how do you become immune to those? There's 26 different ways to do it, and which one of them is the best way and the right trade-off profile? That's a discussion, not a mandate from God. So you need to have somebody around, some system around, to be able to have that conversation, converge to an answer, and not have a Cardano Classic and a Cardano Cash and so forth. It's one of the biggest original sins of our space. Every single time we embrace decentralization, we're also embracing anarchy and chaos for our ability to upgrade. But if we can't upgrade, then we keep launching new coins. There's over 8,000 of them now. And there's going to be more and more and more and more infrastructure plays and tokens coming that basically their whole thing is, well, we chose this upgrade that they didn't choose. And it's not sustainable. What do I do with the government? Go on my system, and when it splits the Cardano Classic, you have to side with our chain. But you also have these Cardano Classic tokens, and your central bank is going to have to sell them. Get real. You just can't convince them that's
just hold this Cardano private over here, and then this Cardano Classic over here.
Yeah, and Cardano Gold here, and Cardano Charles's Vision. I mean, where are we going with this? What are we doing?
You mentioned Google and the NSA.
Yeah.
You were joking, but how do you see the role of centralized tech as it stands today? I mean, we're FANG stocks. What happens? Where are these guys in the future?
Well, I mean, these guys have giant platforms. I don't really worry. People ask, like, how will Cardano compete with Ethereum? It's like, we're doing fine. Don't worry about it. I don't worry about that at all. What I worry about is what happens when Apple, Google, and Facebook enter the show, and Microsoft. When these guys enter the show, collectively, they have like 5 billion users, and they have these giant platform advantages, and they can just shut people out. Apparently, it's totally fine, totally cool. When Parler, for example, got deplatformed from the App Store, that was a bellwether moment, because it said, like, if we philosophically disagree with you or compete with you, we're just going to shut you out and use some excuse. So, Bitcoin is for child porn and money laundering. We're going to shut that out. But Apple Coin is a great coin, and you guys can all use Apple Coin. The U.S. government likes it because KYC is built in. Huzzah! And don't worry, we hold your private keys for you for user experience. The Apple way. We'll just get rid of the charger too. Why not? So anyway, that's coming, guys. That's coming in 5 to 10 years. It's going to happen, and all the social infrastructure is there to basically deplatform regular crypto and ensure that this oligarchy of rich, powerful companies has that. So we as an industry have to come together and come up with solutions of how we prevent that from happening. The problem is the industry is in a weird state where instead of people working together, even when it makes perfect sense for people to work together, they would rather just stab each other in the eye sockets with ice picks just because. Everybody's a sociopath. Everybody's a scammer. Everybody's evil. So I read this book. This guy said this thing about you 8 years ago, and therefore you're evil and I can't work with you. I said, what about all the other stuff? I'm not even asking for money. Can we just sit together and write a standard? No, we can't write a standard. You're evil. The standard will be like written in dark blood and summoned Lucifer or something like that. It's like, what are you doing, people? Don't you understand the real enemy is going to be when the oligarchy of these big tech monopolies comes together, and then they, because they have the platform advantage and get to decide what's on your cell phone, what's on your laptop, will deplatform us and only allow their products to exist. The only thing they're waiting for is the regulatory green light. And it's almost there. The KYC standards are almost there. The SEC is almost comfortable. The CFTC is almost comfortable. Legislation is going to come in the next 24 to 36 months. And when that all comes in, they're going to be in a much better position because they can build KYC into the system. They can whitelist things and blacklist other things. There'll be no privacy. So all of your information will go to the government, and the government will just love it. And then any of our stuff is just like, oh, I'm sorry, you don't follow that standard. We got to deplatform you. There you go.
It sounds very, very similar to another battle that was waged a long time ago with TCP/IP, right? I mean, I think people don't remember that there were competitors.
Oh yeah, like OSI, for example, in the 80s. The difference there was that it wasn't so political. That was more of an adoption and engineering thing and a cost of retooling. But nobody had these grand visions of, if I can control Arrakis, I can control the spice, and then I can control the universe. If I can control the base protocol, then I shall control the universe. It was more of a real technological and standards fight. Here, it is political because we're talking about trillions of dollars of value. We're talking about privacy, property rights, voting rights. We're talking about autonomy. You can prevent civil asset forfeiture. You can evade capital controls. You can evade sanctions with these types of systems. And nation states are getting involved, like Venezuela and Russia and North Korea and Iran, to do so. So the whole world financial order that the nation states of the G8 that are comfortable with, it comes unraveled when this technology comes in. And what we've learned is, if you can't get it done with the public, you get it done with the private. That's the American way. Vaccine passports are a great example of that. There's no legislative framework to get a federal vaccine passport in. But what you can do is create a private standard and then say, well, to get access to the nightclub, the movie theater, the bar, the airport, all these other, you need a vaccine passport. Oh, well, we're not doing it. The federal government's not doing it. No, they're not touching that and so forth. No, but it's the private industry leading. And why are they leading? Because the government basically whispers into their ear, if you don't do this, there will be consequences. You'll lose your license, or you'll have a harder time getting a bank account, or maybe we'll just directly say that that's a public health standard or something, and you can't serve food without it or something like that. But it's no federal standard. The federal government's not inflicting, but it has the same effect. You basically get compliance through that entire thing.
Yeah,
so
it's like the veil of company policy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like mask mandates. It's like, oh, well, it's private business and mandating a mask. If you don't like it, you're violating your libertarian. Well, hang on a second. There's a difference between the owner of a business making that decision for himself and the state mandating the business has to do it. It's like these are not even the same realm of possibilities. And crypto is the exact same way. So the government will just go and have a nice conversation with the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples and the Microsofts and say, how would you like to disintermediate those banks? They'd be like, oh, that's great. We hate paying these processing fees. We hate all this stuff. We'd like to have a direct financial relationship with our customers. They'll say, okay, great. Do these things, give us the data, and we'll create a legislative framework to let you guys do it. Boom. And then they shut out all the other competitors because they don't comply. And then when we complain about it, people say, oh, no, those are private businesses. Private businesses can do whatever they want to do. Oh, and by the way, they control 99.9% of the user experience of people's access to the internet and their digital devices. You're either going to be using an iPhone, an Android device, or Windows device.
I want to talk about that because you brought that up of, Apple's figuring this out, and then, oh, hey, we have the UX, right? We have the experience, right? But today, if I want to send someone, right now, all I can use Ethereum for is like DeFi because I have to lock something up and there's fees and it takes time. Something on Bitcoin is, being sent, and there's really just a store of value there. There's not experience. There's not like operations that are happening. So to me, it's sounding like experience, but like speed, like scalability and speed, and building quality experiences on top of what's happening is where it needs to move next, or people are going to go to do something else.
Yeah. And that's coming, browser extensions are probably the best way of doing that. And, MetaMask has already made enormous progress in that respect. When you think about applications in general, the acronym that you use when you talk about developers, so that's where we're at with Cardano. Alonso's coming, and so smart contracts are coming. The acronym is ACIDIC. And so it stands for developer acquisition, developer collaboration, developer incentives, and then the DIC is for the app experience, and that stands for application deployment, interaction, and curation. So one is a consumer side, one is a developer side. One's about how do I build it, the other is how do I deploy it, profit from it, and have a relationship with the people who consume it. So where Apple innovated in the 2000s was the DIC component. They created a better mousetrap for deployment, interaction, and curation. And as a consequence, it led to rapid growth of their platform. And then it became a platform that kind of surrounded Windows and took over the default application.
Yeah.
So crypto is in that same moment. We haven't had the iPhone moment yet, the App Store moment, but it will come within the next 3 to 5 years. There's going to be something probably in the browser. Maybe we can get it through progressive web apps on the cell phone, and that'll have that DIC figured out. One click to install, beautiful curation, it's secure, and then it can interact with all of your dApps in a very natural way, but also store your crypto, store your identity, and all of these other things. So that's great. And that's why it's essential that projects like Brave survive, because we need to control at least the browser to ensure that that experience cannot be deplatformed. If it's just Google's game and it's just Apple's game and Microsoft's game, they will prevent those types of applications from being installed on the browser. But if there are alternative browsers with high user bases, then that's one window where we're going to have access. Getting it onto the cell phone is a much more difficult experience, but there's a lot of discussion about how to do that. A little easier on the Android side than the iOS side, but there are still ways to get around that. And I think in 3 to 5 years, it's going to be our big struggle, because there's going to be the deplatforming that comes. And so we think about this. We have a whole group of people that study it. We even have a partner, Runtime Verification, that does something called the Alpha Frontier program. We're writing formal specs for dApps so that you can certify them. So in addition to creating a dApp and deploying it to the store, you can create a mathematical proof that the dApp is correct by construction against the specification. So it can visually appear different, and you know that there's no backdoor, or it leaks money or it's hacked or something, because impersonation is a big problem. When you leave centralized curation and you say that Apple's no longer looking at all the apps, how do I know the wallet I'm downloading is actually Charles's wallet and not fake Charles's wallet, where that when I deposit my ADA, it steals all of it, right? Because they can look exactly the same. And so that's something that you have to figure out with the App Store experience, in addition to one-click install, in addition to easy curation, and also non-biasing. So if I'm the App Store creator, what prevents me from putting my app stores up front, my apps up front, and my competitors' apps at the bottom of the list? They're technically listed, but you can never find them. It takes a long time to find them. And Google tends to do this in their App Store. It's like, Google stuff always is prominent, and that's why they have high install rates. Well, it's similar for DeFi. It's something to think about. So the ordering of apps is super important, and that's that C in ACIDIC, the curation component of it. And it's, again, something we think about, and it's actually a broader problem. But you're right. It's going to be a little bit longer for us to get there. But I think all the elements are there. The ease of use is starting to get there. And, we're not alone in this. There's great frameworks. There's great ways of thinking about it. And we have about 10 years of history in the app market where that's really been brought to consumers in a different way. And there's definitely stuff there. But we have to control the browser layer at the very least, because that might be our last stand, our last bastion against the tech oligarchy when it comes in and tries to take over everything.
What do you think on the, I'll call it, all these centralized entities are going to come together and try and monopolize our space. What needs to happen on the more decentralized side? Like, who needs to come together to fight this?
Well, first off, we need to be good about standards and maintaining open source, patent-free, and a standards-driven approach and interoperability between systems. And as an industry, we've been pretty good about that. There are certain blockchains that are highly patented and they control the IP, and I don't firmly believe that they have any place or purpose in our space. Nothing we've done has ever been patented. All of our work is open source. It's another reason why I just get so crazy about the tribalism and the maximalism. It's like, I'm the world's worst human being, but by the way, you can use my 100+ papers, and Polkadot did, and their consensus algorithm is based on it. It's like, okay, isn't it good for me to be around because I'm doing your homework for you? Stuff like that. It's just crazy. So, but anyway, setting that aside, open source is very important. Standards-driven process is very important, like identity management. We have an identity system called Atala Prism, no relation to Promode's Prism, different Prism, namespace collision. And the DID standard that we're using that came from the W3C is the same standard that Microsoft is using for Microsoft Ion, their identity management product. So even though it's built by Microsoft, it's deployed on Bitcoin. Ours is built in Scala. It's deployed on Cardano. Our identity markers are the same as theirs, and they're interoperable with each other. So that's one dimension, is interoperability and building industry level standards, because that does help you prevent vendor lock-in or deplatforming. There needs to be heavy investments in privacy technology, not just privacy of transactions, but also network level privacy, plausible deniability, as well as computational privacy. So private smart contracts. And that's coming with, we created something called Kachina. There's also something called ZEXE that came from the Zcash team, which is quite good. They just recently updated the paper. And then also you need to make sure that the app stores themselves, the way that normal everyday people find the applications, interact with the applications, and rate them and use them, that has to be done in a decentralized way. It's in all of our best interest for EOS and Tezos and Polkadot and Ethereum and Cardano and the rest of the gang to come together and build one app store that's completely decentralized and runs on decentralized infrastructure. But again, ice picks, they won't do it. I could pick up the phone, call them, and they'll say, in principle, we like it, but we like our vendor lock-in. As long as you're using our token, we're okay. So unfortunately, the social and financial incentives inside the systems that we have right now make it very difficult for us to do the kinds of things we need to do collaboratively to compete with the tech oligarchy. Meanwhile, the tech oligarchy is actually really good at working with each other. While Samsung sues Apple and Apple sues Samsung, Samsung also makes the memory modules in the iPhone. And so, they know how to work together. And okay, it's almost like politicians like delivering speeches about how much they hate each other, and then you see them 2 hours later in the bar drinking together. This is the tech.
They're actually working together.
Yes, because they're cutting up the pie. They say, look, your customers are my customers. Microsoft just released an Android phone in the Surface Duo. They deploy Office on Apple devices and Android devices. So Apple customers and Google customers can be Microsoft customers and vice versa. They understand that cooperation and coopetition is a good thing for their bottom line, as long as there's vendor lock-in across that set of oligarchical vendors. It's almost like the triumvirate in Rome, when Pompey and Caesar and Crassus got together and they said, well, we could fight each other, but together, no one can fuck with us. We'll just run the whole empire. So that's basically what they're doing. They're forming a triumvirate of tech companies, and they're basically going to work together to deplatform all their competitors. And if you don't believe me, look how quickly they deplatformed people like Parler. It was like same day, everybody did the same thing. You can't tell me that wasn't coordinated. And if they can coordinate there, why can't they coordinate with Bitcoin or with other such things? And if Bitcoin, maybe they leave that as a sacrificial lamb because that's the socially acceptable one. But notice something, Bitcoin is blind, deaf, and dumb. It has no ability for programmability, and it can't compete with any of the product offerings that they have. So that's okay. Ethereum, on the other hand, is a competitor. That goes. Cardano goes. These other guys go, and so forth. So to answer to your question concisely, in my view, is cooperation. We have to work together as an industry on standards, keep things open source. And there are certain activities, whether it be IP standards for NFTs or it be a common dApp store, that makes sense across blockchain. And from our part, we try to work. We're a member of the W3C. We're a member of the Hyperledger Group. We're a member of the Digital Identity Foundation. We do write standards. We have our own standards process for Cardano called the CIP, and we'll keep iterating, evolving. And we're happy to work with anybody where and when it makes sense. But what we found is there's less than a strong appetite for collaboration in our industry, unfortunately, to the industry's detriment.
And it's almost like the interoperability of some simple nomenclature and identifiers could go a long way, not necessarily huge, large integrations of anything. It's just, it's just agreeing on some identifiers of a couple of basic things and getting things started. Like you said, an app store. It's like, hey, we're going to throw out a V1 of this. What do you guys think? Right. And kind of moving that forward. I had a question about, what about hardware, right? Or like the actual, like, I'm kind of thinking in my mind, like, well, are we all going to be just on Starlink with like a decentralized phone or something? And then that's going to power everything. Like, I'm just thinking that would be like the only way in my mind, internet to everyone in the world. And on this specific phone, we're all using like a SpaceX phone or something.
Yeah, we have a lot of telco conversations, and we've been doing a lot of stuff in that space, some public, some private. It's a great thing. It's actually a renaissance for internet connectivity. There's the cost of launching LEO satellites is extremely low, thanks to reusability. So SpaceX is going to kill everybody in that space because their cost of launching is 1/1000th of their competitors' cost, and LEO is a great platform because the low latency. Normally, the problem with high altitude satellites is it takes almost a second for the signal to get there and back. So you say hi, wait a second, they get it. You can't do that for gaming. It makes video conferencing very annoying because you always have those delays, and the bandwidth has never been too good. With LEO, you can have satellites that sit much lower, and so their latency is around 40 to 50 milliseconds instead of 700 milliseconds on the ping. And also, there's ways to triangulate where you get much better bandwidth, and also their life cycle is shorter. So those satellites only last 5 years or something like that. So you're always upgrading instead of having hardware that sits for 15 years in the sky. You have hardware that lives for 5 years or so forth, and that means you're always with the latest and greatest and bestest stuff. And we've learned so much from the 5G movement and the prior generations of wireless. And I have a whole book on wireless communication on my desk, and that book is already out of date, and it was already a really sophisticated book. And so it just tells you that that's one of the fastest, most rapidly evolving things. So you asked me a question about democratization of the access to internet, and this is actually where geopolitics helps us. America doesn't like China. China doesn't like America, and it's in America's best interest for the Chinese people to get free access to internet, because the more they know about what the evils their government does, the better for them. The same for Russia and other places. So any place that's closing their internet, building great firewalls, there is a incentive to invest in infrastructure that allows people in those countries to breach that firewall and get information about what's going on. So the very same investments there are the types of investments that we can piggyback on and actually use to make sure that we can always relay crypto transactions, and we can always process smart contracts and so forth. Also, there's a big movement right now of micro ISPs, very common in India. That's why 4G access is so incredibly cheap. In America, we're very monopolized, but basically the idea is that you have a hub and spoke where you have a major provider, but then all your communities have like micro providers who are micro ISPs, and they resell bandwidth to all the people in their community and so forth. So that type of hub and spoke model is becoming more decentralized, more prevalent. We think Africa in particular, that's what's going to get to 90% coverage. You'll have thousands and thousands and thousands of micro ISPs, some cases using unregulated spectrum, cases like Wi-Fi and stuff like that. And then they use some sort of a satellite or other backbone to connect. So there's a lot of really cool stuff there. Even amongst 5G, there's a lot of competition. There's great protocols like, for example, Open RAN. And with software-defined networking, you can do amazing virtualization of these networks and do like spectrum slicing. You can tokenize the spectrum. You can tokenize bandwidth. You can tokenize priority of access. It's amazing what you can do when you actually get into the details of this stuff. So I have high hopes for ubiquitous connectivity, and I think that anybody who's trying to build great firewalls is going to have a very hard time shutting all that down. And this is all pre-quantum teleportation, quantum communication stuff.
I wanted to ask, what part of your mind share at IOHK is actually like going towards quantum resistance right now? Like what part of the roadmap, like John and I are always our roadmap, right? Like he's always pushing things out of the way as I'm just launching bombs at it. But like what part of your roadmap's actually focused on that?
We do have a few people we collaborate with, like Alex Russell, one of the co-authors of the Ouroboros paper, is an expert in this stuff, and he's at a University of Connecticut. And we have actually written a few papers where we kind of talked around what is a quantum adversary and is Bitcoin quantum resistant or not. And it turns out it does have some degree of resistance. And usually what people think about quantum resistance, what they're talking about is the signature scheme. And there are great signatures, like there's a NIST project right now for quantum resistance signatures, and they use different mathematical primitives like lattice-based signatures or hash-based signatures. So there's a great thing called crystals. It's a framework for lattice-based crypto, and the signature scheme I think is called dilithium. So I guess they're Star Trek fans, but that's a great primitive. And then there's also things like XMSS and Sphinx, and there's all the usual suspects write these papers like Peter Schwabe and Daniel. Something. I'll remember his name in a moment. Over at University of Chicago, that's great. And we do collaborate with them from time to time. Like we've talked to Peter Schwabe and so forth. And so if we really wanted to, we could very easily create a quantum resistant signature scheme, but that's only part of the story. Like, you also need random numbers for proof of stake, and usually you do that through something like called a VRF or a VDF. A VRF is not quantum resistant. Those use classical crypto assumptions. And so you would need to make that quantum resistant. And then you'd also need to say, what other capabilities would a quantum adversary have? Perhaps they could do special weird ass network attacks or something like that. I don't know. So that's a hard endeavor. It's going to be a bigger priority for us now that NIST is getting involved. There's a lot of really good people that are standardizing America's crypto suite to be resistant to quantum computers. And over the next 10 years, there's going to be a huge effort in the cryptographic community to accommodate that. Great. It's not a near-term problem. Now, what I was discussing about networking was quantum communication, where that's a very different way. That's where you're using quantum entanglement and the other things to transmit information. Now, the advantage there is that intercepting the message is exceedingly difficult. And you also have much lower latency potentially. And so that is really special because nobody will even know you're talking to somebody. The classic network model is you have Alice here, you have Bob here, and Alice sends something to Bob over some unsecured medium. It can be a wire, it can be radio, be, carrier pigeon, whatever it is. But then they assume that Eve is capable of intercepting that medium and getting a copy of that message. So what cryptography is about is, despite the fact that Eve can do that between Alice and Bob, how do we get a guarantee that Eve doesn't gain any additional knowledge from that? But when you talk about quantum world, it may be the case that there's no Eve anymore.
Right. It just shows up in a new place.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, that's a whole different ballpark, but that's probably not coming until the 2040s and the 2050s. And there's all kinds of cool stuff like time crystals and shit. And it's the real thing. Time crystals.
I know. This will have to be like a beer in Colorado. Like, 5 years from now, we'll be talking about it.
And it's not my area of expertise. I studied number theory. I'm about as far as possible from quantum computers and quantum physics as you can get. When I'm in my 40s, that sounds like a perfect thing to go and think about and study. But it's not 30s, Charles. I'm 33. I'm too young for that.
Yeah, you're a young guy. I know we're getting on time. I want to be respectful. John, I don't know if you had anything. I wanted to talk about Africa a little bit, unless you had something else before that.
I'm just thinking, I was listening to Charles and I'm thinking, aren't we right back to the governance discussion? And if quantum computing becomes a real threat and certain, there's a lack of collaboration across some crypto projects and blockchains, and there's a lack of updating those blockchains to be quantum resistant, those that are resistant survive and those that are not basically get hacked.
We call that a Darwinian a consumer model. So basically, you're under selective pressures and the survival of the fittest. If my competitors can't do what we can do, they die. I'm not going to cry about that, John.
Seems like the strong survive type of guy.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of questions about Africa, and I actually, it looks like you've got some efforts there. Like, again, we talked about democratizing opportunity. I didn't know too much. I mean, are you guys? It seems like you guys have a big community there. Or you're working there. What's happening?
There's so much stuff going on in Africa. But we're going to have a special episode of Cardano 360. We call it the Africa Special, and hopefully we'll be able to announce that very soon. But we've been running around the continent for a long time. Our biggest office is in Ethiopia and Addis Ababa. And actually, we just partnered with SingularityNet. We're merging our office into theirs, and there's probably going to be like 30 to 50 people that are in that office. And we do everything. We're on one side fintech, one side govtech, and then we also think about supply chains and agricultural technology. And it can be everything from, hey, let's get like land on a ledger, because deeds are a huge issue in Africa, to voting, to, let's identify people. So let's create an identity layer. And then once you have an identity layer, we talk reputation, credit, talk payment systems, all these types of things. Everything in Africa on the governance side is going to be upgraded in the next 10 years across most of the African countries. And it's the fastest growing of all the economies in the world. Africa is like China in the 1980s. Most people from the outside say, why are you in China? Venezuela has a larger economy than China. Come on, it's crazy. But the really clever people who are looking at the social dynamics and seeing the policy changes and so forth said, this is a rocket ship. They're right now loading fuel into it so you don't see it. But I want to be in the ship when it takes off. And then the people who were, they all became billionaires. They did very, very well. If you look at the demographics of Africa, Ethiopia, for example, 70% of the population's at or under the age of 30.
Yeah.
Most of them are digital natives And most of them are pro crypto if they've heard about it. And they grew up with a cell phone in their hand. They grew up connected to the internet through some means. If you look at the leadership of Africa, most of the leaders, the old guys, the Joe Biden age, are being replaced with the younger guys who happen to be actually pretty technically savvy. The prime minister of Ethiopia is a cryptographer. He can actually read,
Wow.
he can read the papers we write. I can't do that with Joe.
Yeah.
I can't go over to the White House and be like, yeah, let's talk about perfect Ford secrecy. Be like,
Yeah. Joe, remember when you played Rainbow Six when you were a kid and you were trying to, it's like, no, you can't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, the mumble rap president, we just can't work with him on that. So anyway, we're really excited about the demographics. We're really excited about how fast the economies were growing. Pre-COVID, they were growing 10 to 15% per year. We think, looking at McKinsey reports and just talking with infrastructure ministers, that we should have about 90% internet coverage across Africa by 2030. And this is a continent that likes digital currencies. Look at the spread of M-Pesa. They also don't have strong rule of law, so they need something to replace that to improve rule of law. There's a strong demand for anti-corruption and transparency, and there's a strong demand for digital payments and digital currencies. Who do you think wins in that conversation? Blockchain. That's our thing. That's what we've been selling. So when you talk about DeFi, those are the people, that 1.2 billion people. Those are the customers that matter most. And when they grow wealthier and they start liquefying that $5.5 trillion of wealth that's there, that's the platform that they're going to go do that with. And regulations in those areas are aligned for crypto. That's why we're seeing such strong growth and adoption. And it's good to be there early. So we're all across the continent. We have people in Nigeria. We know people in Kenya. We've been to Rwanda, Uganda. We have a lot of partners like ISADIS and so forth. And Ethiopia in particular is very special to us. And we've actually closed some deals. So we will announce those and talk about those at the Africa special, hopefully soon. I don't want to front run that announcement because we have a whole media package and exclusives.
Yeah, we had some people in the chat asking about that.
Yeah. But it's great. I love working in Africa. It's like the highlight of my career, because you're really giving people who have very little not only something, but something to grow from. And then once they have it, they can globalize and they can create wealth and protect the wealth that they have. But also, I'm changing America by changing Africa. Because here's the thing: if they adopt blockchain and our vision and our paradigm as an industry, then wealth goes to the edges. They have strong middle class. The impoverished become wealthier, and the countries just run better. They have fraud-free elections. There's guarantees that everything is right. And over time, 20 years, 30 years, they become far more competitive than the corrupt, bureaucratic, nepotistic American government or the European governments and so forth. So the only way America can compete is to become like Africa. Wow, what a concept, right?
Man.
The system actually beats it. And so that's how we can come back to America and say you should adopt crypto. Otherwise, you're going like, please, 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 Goldman Sachs, please be honest. Please don't speak anymore. Please promote great regulation.
You proved yourself in 2009, so I'm giving you a second chance.
Yeah, exactly. You can be different.
Yeah. It's with Africa, it's like I kind of assimilate it to almost like Tesla with the auto industry of like, a jump in opportunity because there's no technical debt, right? Like not the 100-year-old industry that still is technically illegal in some states to sell direct to a consumer, right? Tesla comes in and blows the whole model up, and it's new technology. I mean, look at, the way that they've been able to do that. It's like Africa to me feels the same way with blockchain of, hey, we're starting here.
Yeah. To win the game, you got to change the rules of the game. You can't. This game cannot be won under the existing rule set. The incumbents are too powerful, and they have too many built-in advantages. And I think in places like Ghana and Rwanda and Uganda, these are going to be the places that actually lead in the next 10 or 20 years because they can play a completely new game. In fact, our next class we're going to teach people in person for programming when COVID goes away is Ghana. We're going to Accra. And I'll go there. It's going to be so much fun. I love the food, love the people, and we'll train an amazing cohort of people. And I actually might create a Bitcoin client or something like that with those developers. Be really fun to actually show what you can do once you train people and what they can get. A lot of our people were actually working in the office in Ethiopia. We started with education, so we partnered with the Ministry of Education and Innovation, and they gave us access to all the universities. We said, give us your best and brightest. We had over 300 people try and compete, female developers, because it was an all-women's class for our Haskell training class. And it was actually our best class. Our guys went and lived in the country for 3 months, and We hired, I think, a quarter of the class, and now they're part of the programmers and developers in Ethiopia. They're keeping it right up with the ones trained out of Cambridge and Oxford and Harvard and other places. It's really amazing to see that. That's great human capital, and I cannot wait to see where that goes and what we can build, especially when we talk DeFi, because that is where the DEXs are going to be used. That's where security tokens are going to be used. Think about all the businesses in Ethiopia that are super profitable. They're cash rich, but have no liquidity. They can't securitize because there's no stock market there.
Yep.
That's going to be a security token play. And then you can go and invest in stuff with 20% returns that you could never find in America, but you can find there. So a lot of direct foreign investment will come. And that's going to be the really exciting part of my career, I think, in the mid 2020s.
Wow. Well, when you head there, we'd love to help you with whatever you need help with.
We'd love to have you guys come. Be a lot of fun.
Awesome, man. Well, I mean, we're a little bit over the time. I want to be respectful. John, unless you got anything else, Charles, this is super fun. Thank you so much. I mean, everyone's going crazy in the chat right now. I probably have 1,000 other questions that we can ask you. So we're going to have you come back at some point, or maybe actually do this live one day when we can all hang out again.
Yeah. Go ahead, John. I just want to ask Charles, like, I mean, if there's anything coming ahead with Cardano that you want to leave us with, any key milestones, anything more with Alonzo?
Alonzo's coming. Smart contracts, man. It's going to be here when you blink your eyes. It's going to be so fast. Like when we launched Mary, in March, that was multi-asset. Let's look at it right now, real time. So if you go to cardanoassets.com, so let me just bring it up. I'll tell you how many assets that people have issued on Cardano. Let's see here. We are at Cardano assets. Let me refresh the page. I'm having an issue with my browser. Can you guys go and read off the numbers of how many assets are there? The last time I checked, it was like over 30,000 or 40,000. I think my ad blocker is interfering with the page. This is a community-driven page that's tracking all the stuff that's
the token, the CardanoAssets.com.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy, and so they just like 2 months. That's actually less than a month and a half. That's our progress. And so smart contracts are coming. That's going to be our biggest milestone. And then obviously the funds, Fund 4, Fund 5, and so forth with Catalyst. And the Fund 5 is $2 million. There's $500 million in the treasury for projects. Every time we do it, like 40 plus projects are getting funded. So I'm really looking forward to all that stuff. And I'm looking forward to the Africa special as well. I think people are going to really enjoy that. And we're going to supercharge the Africa strategy this year. Also, the Cardano 2025 roadmap is coming out, like what would we like to accomplish over the next 5 years. And we have this weird concept called the DCF. We're building it with a major consultancy. I can't announce the name quite yet, but they're a brand name people know, and we're having a lot of fun working with them on that concept. So it's going to be a good year. Everything's kind of coming together, everything kind of turning on, and the dream is becoming reality. And the community metrics you guys showed it off at the beginning of the show, are just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I mean, it was probably more than 1 million people in the community, and Reddit's huge. I think I have 320,000 Twitter followers now. Twitter finally verified me. Go figure. Somebody had to be shot for that. So it's pretty crazy to see what's happened just this year, and those metrics will continue to increase, and those mentions will continue to increase. But what's amazing is the community, once they come in, they tend to stay. It's like Warren Buffett said, I tend to buy stock in companies. I tend to invest in things. I tend to be part of things when people tattoo the logo on their body. Only Apple and Cardano are the only two things I've seen where that's pretty consistent. There's a lot of people running around with Cardano logos on their body. I'm thinking, like, these guys are probably here to stay. They're not going.
Nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd.
Right. When you do that, it's probably you've crossed the Rubicon of crypto endorsements. So this is a very evangelistic, very engaged community, and they give back. And it's just extraordinary to see the charity in the community. I think of the 2,000 stake pools, a lot of them are charity pools. They're doing clean water projects, education, and healthcare projects. We have a lot of people doing really cool things with artists. Like NFTs are getting very sexy and so forth. Did you guys see my Space Buds interview I did yesterday?
I was just going to say, I watched it last night and I was so impressed. He was awesome. He was really great.
Yeah. 20-year-old German kid. I wasn't doing that at 20.
Man.
Jesus.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, guys, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Of course, Charles, man. Thank you. And thank you guys, everyone in the chat, for listening. And Charles will chat with you just in a sec backstage. And this will be on podcast. This is on YouTube, Twitch, Data, you name it. So everyone, thank you so much